So I expect people to say things during this process. And I'll let you know. I'll let you know. So I'll kind of preface this with a first question I actually want answers. Like, I'm serious. I want other people to say things. Why does this house have so many gables? Anyone? No? Okay, I haven't heard any full answers yet. What did someone say? An over-enthusiastic carpenter. Any others?
They want vaulted ceilings.
They want vaulted ceilings. Yeah, that's fair. Any others?
The contractor's getting a cut on the building materials.
Contractors getting a cut on the building materials. Probably right. Anybody else?
They're in love with those terrible returns with those slanted tops.
They're in love with those terrible returns with the slanted tops. Only some people will get the details of that. Anyone else back there? Different users, you say? Different members of the household? Okay. So, for those who don't know, for context, this is the HGTV 2020 Dream House, which is outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I have not seen it. I have not seen it in person. I'm not even exactly sure where it is, but it is outside of Pittsburgh. But think about the implications of that. That means that this house, for all intents and purposes, is the most desirable house in America in 2020. And like some people chuckle, but this doesn't surprise me at all. Like not even a little bit. By the way, they lean into the number of gables as a design choice and call this the house of many gables. In case you're wondering. They actually call the house of 5 gables, even though I count 6 when I do that. Anyway, but there are black framed windows, there's board and batten siding, steeply pitched roof, farmhouse aesthetic, wood columns. I work with production builders every day, and this is the amalgamation of every single thing they tell me is popular with people right now. So this does not surprise me at all, and I want to be very clear, I am not saying any of those things are bad things. Like, none of those are bad things. But it means that this house was designed and delivered to maximize the value, and not just the value of like, oh, this house is going to cost X, but the perceived value to the person, thinking this house would be very valued because it has all of these market drivers that people want. So the reason behind this house is market desirability. That's what the house is for. So everything in the built environment has a reason. Like there's a reason behind everything. One of the most powerful sentences that I ever heard in architecture school was Stephen Guzan, "We do this because." And the concept of we do this because of things having a fundamental reason completely changed how I thought about architecture as a student. You didn't just do something because it looked right, or because it would sell, or for any reason. It had a reason behind it. There was something foundational to why it was the way it was. So you pick your reasons. There we go. So architecture can have environmental reasons. We build this overhang because it sheds water, or because it provides shade. We build mass walls so it can soak up the heat of the day and release it back to us at night. We build south-facing windows large in the north to let sun come in. We shade those windows in the west to block out harsh light. We build a house on piers to allow for water to pass underneath. So I actually flew here. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's where Urban Design Associates is. But we travel all over. And I actually flew here from Southwest Louisiana. That's where I was yesterday. Yes, yesterday. And I was in Lake Charles, Louisiana, as we were working with folks there on a 50-year resilience master plan for Calcasieu and Cameron Parish. And some have called Lake Charles in particular the most storm-battered city in the United States. So in the past year-ish, they had Hurricanes Laura, Delta, a series of tornadoes, and a winter storm. So these are folks who have dealt with quite a bit over the last several months. And so Southwest Louisiana, for those who are visualizing it, is the heel of the boot. So closer to Houston, really, than to New Orleans, if you're thinking in terms of big cities. And in this experience, There was a significant donor who really wanted to give back to his hometown and really donated to the Community Foundation of Southwest Louisiana to have this large Just Imagine process. It's called Just Imagine SWLA. So working on this 50-year resilience master plan. And it is a massive community engagement effort. So through over 4,000 comments from community members, 10 catalytic projects kind of got funneled down through that. So what's a catalytic project? Something that's visible, powerful, and that would start in the next 5 years, so that people could actually see the progress happening. So there's lots of interesting projects in that, one of them being waterfront development, so I was excited to hear that something like that is happening here in Sweden as well. But I think that something that was really interesting in those 10 catalytic projects was this idea of a resilient housing toolkit. So how do we take research that's been done by FEMA, by the LSU Ag Center, by so many different folks, and condense it down? Because right now, the most user-friendly guide to building for adaptive buildings and adaptive responsive architecture is FEMA's Homeowner's Guide to Retrofitting, which is 215 pages long. So if you are a person who's just had your house decimated by a storm, the first thing you are not doing is reading a 215-page long manual on what you can do better. So really, what the Resilient Housing Toolkit is condensing those hundreds of pages of documentation into a 20-ish page guide. That's done at the level that it doesn't matter if you're a builder or an architect or anything like that, you can understand what's going on. And so as I was talking to a lot of builders and a lot of engineers about the Resilient Housing Toolkit, one of the most pervasive problems that they're seeing in Southwest Louisiana is called mounding. And so it's basically building a big mound and building a slab-on-grade foundation on top of that mound to get the house out of the floodplain. And on the surface, it sounds like, yeah, that should work. You build it up high and you can set it on and that's fine. But it's changing the land. And by changing the land, it's flooding other houses and flooding other properties and causing undermining. So the foundations are actually getting washed out from underneath over time. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, but why would anybody do this? Like, why are you bounding up? There is a solution for how we do this in Louisiana. We build the house on piers to let water run underneath. And when I talked to these builders and engineers, the thing they said was really simple, but super profound. We forgot. Like, it's been so long since there was a major flooding hurricane in this region that we forgot that there was a reason why we built this way and why it was important to build this way. And it sounds fine, it's like, well, how could you forget? But we think in memory, our built environment is memory. And when those things go away, when those pieces go away, it's very easy for that forgetting to happen. Which gets me to my favorite topic. I'm so happy we are in an adaptive reuse space. Because when we talk about historic architecture, it is our memory in the built environment. That is our memory in the built environment. And so every time we lose a piece of it, we lose a piece of our memory. Because these are the buildings that have survived disaster. And these are the buildings that have been loved enough to have someone fight for them. And these are the buildings that hold the edges of our streets and the edges of our places and that actually make them places. So these buildings have so much to teach because they have their reasons on display in every detail. And there are other reasons too. There are social reasons. Come and debate in the shady colonnade. There are no walls. This is symbolic. Why was it a colonnade where the Agora was for people to come and debate? There are no walls. Everybody can see discourse going on. Caveat, everybody, men look a certain way. But there was a reason for that. The church, come and witness the power of God, the steeple, the entry, the ethereal size and scale of the building. Come and witness the power of democracy. The plinth is raised. The scale is regal. We will represent you. Architecture can also be for community and from community. Every structural component and detail is derived from my community and local traditions. We can create this ourselves with knowledge, tools, experience that we have. We can raise this barn with our neighbors. We can source wood, stone, and other materials from nearby locations. We are not dependent on specific manufacturers, systems, or a long canon of knowledge to create shelter for us and our communities. But architecture is just a piece of this conversation, because places have reasons too. And choosing those reasons or understanding the existing reasons behind places is the single most important thing we can do as users, designers, funders, developers, activators of these spaces. Places can have environmental reasons. Oops, I left that. There we go. Places can have environmental reasons. So the trees in the park, or the trees on the street, or the trees by the bus stop, they all provide shelter. The spaces on the south side to soak up the sun so the snow can melt and the space can be used. Places can have social reasons. Come and trade in the market square. Graze your livestock on the community green. Gather in the plaza. Picnic in the park. Have a chat with me on your front porch while you're walking your dog on the sidewalk and I'm sitting on the porch. These are reasons that create social fabric of a place. And places can be for the community, from the community. This is where I hear the news from my neighbors. This is where I can hang out with my friends and I can walk there because I can't drive yet. I feel like this place is for me, that it fits the needs of my community and my culture and can adapt when those needs change. But more often, our places are leftover space. So these diagrams are in Paul Rowe's book, Collage City. And he describes one as voids in a solid, and the other as solids in a void, which you can kind of see in the middle. These are figure ground diagrams, so buildings are in black, spaces in white. And I love participating as a juror in student reviews in architecture schools. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love watching students learn. And so often, they're being trained as architects. I was trained as an architect. I am a licensed architect. And so often, because of that, they see their role as to create buildings, which is fair. That's fair. And they see that as that number one role, but for me, the most important role of the architect is to contribute to the spaces that the buildings shape. Because far more people in the life of the building are going to experience the shape and the space that the building creates than they ever will building. And when I first wanted to go into architecture, I remember thinking that I wanted to create buildings that impacted a lot of people. So I wanted to do museums or libraries, and those were buildings that were important to me and ones that I wanted to create. But as I learned more about architecture, and especially as I learned more about urban design, I found out if I wanted to impact a large number of people, it had very little to do with what was going on inside the building. And it had everything to do with how the building shapes and creates space. No. Awesome. Is that better? Awesome. So it had nothing to do with, or very little, I guess, to do with the inside of the building. And so much more to do with how the buildings were placed and how they were shaped and how they created all of the places that we spend time in every day. For good or for ill, the architecture and its shaping of the place becomes more important. So back to the students. When I am working as a juror with student reviews, I am hard pressed to find a single student who has drawn a site plan. It almost never happens. They are so enamored with the floor plan that they get right into it and they want to talk about here's how the building works. But how does the space work? How do you enter your building? What is the space like in front of it, around it, behind it, to the side of it? What are the spaces that your building creates? So when they want to hit that ground running with their floor plan and all of that, they're not aware that the buildings can enhance or irrevocably damage the spaces that they're creating. But so often, our places are not intended for people at all. They're leftover space. And so often, our places are only for some people. So this is another one that I want to elicit feedback. What's happening in this area? Folks, once anyone knows where this is. Anybody? Not Pittsburgh. Though there are some spaces where you could probably take a pretty similar area.
Is anywhere an interstate highway went through?
Anywhere an interstate highway went through, not far off. They're like truly not far off. Any other guesses?
Some sort of economic segregation.
Some sort of economic segregation. I heard Baltimore. It's not Baltimore. There is economic segregation. Not Syracuse. Redlining. I hear that. Very important point here.
Ohio.
Not Atlanta. Not Ohio.
Buffalo.
Not Buffalo. The interesting thing is, though, as people are saying things, we work all over the country, I'm seeing places just like this area in each of these cities.
It's created a small, almost gated community
Seeing a small, almost gated community on the right-hand side, not far off. So this is Woodward Avenue in Detroit. I heard something like I just said it. And yeah, this is in Michigan. This aerial, I don't have to tell anybody, is not Photoshop. This is just how it is. There's a website called unequalspaces.com, I believe, which in all the cities that were just called out are featured there as well. And when you look at an area like this, there's a really clear line of what's happening. So often I hear people talk about, oh, what we need to do are fix the broken systems. I would submit that systems are not broken. Systems benefit exactly who they were designed to benefit, every time. They're not broken systems. If you create your places to attract certain people and to exclude others, don't be surprised when you succeed. Some questions to keep in mind when thinking about building places, creating places through the space that's left, the space you create, to think about the users of the space. Does the community around the place love the place? Are they welcome in the place? Is that place and what happens there designed with them in mind, and more importantly, is it designed with their direct input? Does it meet the changing needs of those who they were designed to serve, and does it have a reason? Like, is there a reason behind that place? Interlude. So unless you are the only user of a place, how could anyone possibly believe that only one person should design it? If you're not the only user, why should you be the only designer? And how could it ever be designed without direct community involvement? When the reasons behind your place come from the community, they come from a place of power and of ownership. The reasons are grounded in the truth of the place that exists and not somebody else's ideal vision for the place. Most importantly, not just some trained designer's ideal vision of the place. Your degree does not give you power. Ownership and the community give you power. Your experience doesn't give you power. The experience of the places that you are working in gives the power to the place, because that's love, and that's sustainability, and that's ownership. Because only things that are loved are sustained. So, community engagement. Lessons learned in community engagement. Urban Design Associates has been deeply engaged in the process of community engagement for over 50 years, 1964. David Lewis, our founder, when he came as an expatriate from South Africa, and the first project that Urban Design Associates undertook in 1964 was the desegregation of Pittsburgh public schools. And that's a really weird thing for an architecture and design firm to do as their first project. And when David Lewis was first finding the places to hold the public meetings, he had no idea what to do. He passed away in 2020, and I remember him telling me this story story where he took a pen that he had dipped in an ink bottle, and he just kind of threw it on the map of Pittsburgh, and wherever the ink blots landed was where the community meetings were going to be held. Because this was such a pervasive problem that was all over the city that he knew that in order to get true community input, it had to be everywhere, it had to go everywhere. So when we talk about these lessons learned in community engagement, this is over 50 years of learning, sometimes the hard way. And so just looking at these, asking simple, open-ended questions to get the full range of perspectives. Focusing on regular people and their needs. Using imagery that's relatable and offers real alternatives. We love the visual preference survey. Very excited to see that, and really hope that everyone goes over there and gets their input. Have honest conversations about what's going on, the costs, the community benefits. And this is so important because so often we do love to dream and we do love to be excited to have a big dreaming charrette. But there's also that point where you have to have realistic conversations with people about what can actually happen so that their input has power and meaning that can shape the space. Use concrete examples of places people know. This is so important. Because if you just pull out examples that are just great, which is fine. Like, it's great to have precedent imagery from all over the country and all over the world, but if you can focus in on a place that people know, what's your favorite street in your town, in your county? Like, all of a sudden, things start to shift. Provide transparent and straightforward information. Keep local context in mind. That you can say, what's your favorite building on this street? Why? Why do you like it? And so often we're like, oh, but people who aren't trained this way can't articulate no, I don't want to hear it. People know why they like something. They do. And it may not be in the words that you learned in school or in any of these things, but people can tell you why they like a place. And when you actually listen to what they're saying, you can help create good places. Use formats that encourage people to listen to alternative perspectives. We like to hear ourselves talk, and we like to create spaces that bring people like us to talk together. And so what's most important is to bring that alternative perspectives together, which might mean that things get a little hot and a little uncomfortable in the space, and sometimes they do. But if you're not listening to alternative range of perspectives, you are just an echo chamber and you're just hearing yourself. Identify underrepresented groups and make a special effort to include them. In the process of community engagement, that might mean providing childcare or providing food. Like, there are so many things where we talk about, so who gets to come to these meetings, who are welcome in these spaces, and if I can't get there because the meeting's at 5 and I get off at 5:30, if I can't get there because there's no one to watch my kids, or because I have to cook dinner, how are you actually getting the wide range of perspectives? How do you identify these underrepresented groups and bring them to your spaces? Design a process that emphasizes listening rather than educating. The worst phrase that I hear in architecture offices all the time is, we just need to educate the client. And it's not, there are aspects of education that are important. Why something works better than something else. But when you come into a place, you are coming to lead with humility and the idea that you are not just a designer, you are a translator for what people are saying. You can take what they are saying in their words and you can make that build form. And that's a superpower. That's magical. And when I say you, I mean those in here who are designers, those in here who are the ones creating policy, those in here who are the developers, whatever aspect of that magic you are bringing to the fore. This is creating. This is something that nothing was there and now something will be, or something has fallen to ruin and you're bringing it back. That's magic. So let's talk about reasons that are sustainable. So I said a bit ago, I don't mean greenwashing when I say sustainable. I don't mean let's make this green or whatever. I'm saying that if something is loved, it is sustained. If someone loves a place, they're willing to do whatever it takes to keep that place in good repair, to keep that place moving long into an uncertain future, which is something that's in Steve Guzon's book, The Original Green, which I would encourage anybody to read, talking about true sustainability. But then let's talk about reasons that have longevity. How does this place or building stand up in its environment? How can this building or place adapt when that environment changes? When that environment changes, as it's changing now. Let's talk about reasons that are part of the social fabric. If I don't have a car, can I do what I need to do? Can I still experience this place? If I'm a child or a teenager, are there things for me to do and enjoy that aren't limited by the dictates of my house or my yard or my parents' ability to drive me somewhere? If I'm a parent, can I access the people and the businesses that I need to create the necessary village to raise my child? If I'm elderly, do I have support systems in place when I get older or less mobile? These are all part of the built environment too, and these are things that we can codify into the built environment. When I'm in a place that has a reason that is more than market viability, I can feel it immediately. And it never means going into market 100% of the time. Impossible. But it means that when it comes down to it, you can describe the reasons behind a place. Why is a place there? And if you can describe why it's there, you can describe why it's important. So if you want to teach the building of a good place, of a beautiful place, to the next generation of developers, of designers, of builders, of policymakers, don't give them a script, give them a reason. That's kind of all I have. So if we have like questions, or we want to talk more about it, absolutely can. We still have like 15 minutes, so if people have questions, if people want to talk about this, I really intentionally did this so that I can have people ask things. Because what I hear a lot after saying something like this is, well, that's nice. So what do I do now? And so I'm happy to answer those types of questions too. Oh, thanks, Sarah.
I'm looking at your brief bio, and I'm curious about a statement that was made, thank you, that says, what are the principles that differentiate neighborhoods from projects?
Yep.
And I'd like to know the attributes more clearly, because you said a lot of wonderful things. But is that like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of a situation that?
No. And here's why. Here's why it's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the question, if people didn't hear it, was one of the things in the description of what I was going to say was, what are the difference between neighborhoods and projects? Like in terms of like, you know, someone's doing development or a project. And is it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of list? No, it's not. I wish it was. But that's kind of where this all came out of, this idea of a reason. Because when you're talking about that differentiation between a neighborhood and project, there are some things that you could pull out as individual things. I think one of the important things is variety of what's being built there. Because, you know, the true neighborhood, if you go back historically, you're looking at a wide range of buildings, but often not a wide range of designs. So some of the things that built some of our best neighborhoods were, you know, Sears kit houses that you could order from a catalog, were done by builder pattern books. So like there were just a few types of house designs that a builder would building. So like replication is actually not usually the problem. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's a cookie cutter subdivision because everything's the same. It's typically not the issue. It is a lot of variety in a narrow range, which I feel like I'm quoting Steve Guzon all day today, but he actually said wide variety in a narrow range, which was talking a lot about that sort of thing. How do you create lots of nuanced variety? So if you think of different places, the painting ladies in San Francisco, they're all the same house. Like there's almost, if you look at them really closely, you'll see some differences in a bay window or in the location of the window, but they're all up with when you're looking at a project versus a neighborhood is it's about some sort of principle of exclusion. So there's either a gate, or the roads don't connect all the way through, or there's some sort of fence around the whole thing. And when we're looking at most neighborhoods, they're connected into the rest of the fabric of the place. So the roads connect, there's usually no gate, there's usually nothing that's decidedly differentiating it. And that's kind of tough to work on with some people. I mean, we'll talk to people and they'll be like, well, but we want to have some sort of security or some sort of additional thing. And so often when we're talking about a neighborhood that's built around the fabric, connectivity is one of the first things. So if I was looking at it, I am on a charrette with Urban Design Associates, and we are looking at either creating a new neighborhood or reconnecting a pre-existing neighborhood. The first thing that we're doing is we are drawing the connections for the streets. It's the first thing every time. And so if we go from streets, then we go to usable, viable blocks. Are there blocks that have really clear fronts and backs? What's happening in the front and what's happening in the back? Are the fronts shaping space? And are the backs hiding things that we don't necessarily want to or need to see that don't contribute to that social fabric, like parking or the dumpsters or whatever else? So when we're talking about creating a neighborhood, usually number one, you're starting with connectivity. And when you're talking about how to create that wide variety and narrow range from an architectural perspective, I work a lot with production builders, and so we're talking a lot about how do you use the same plan to create a completely different experience all across the street. So we call it the kit of parts going out. And so often we might have one plan that can be expressed in 3 or 4 different ways. So exact same plan can be a Victorian house, a craftsman house, a colonial revival house, and that's all looking at styles. But what we're able to do with that is if we're going into the context of the place, we can see what are the styles that are really prevalent here. And the US is really cool because there are really common themes with that. Like there are craftsman style houses in almost every city in the United States. There are colonial revival houses, Victorian houses. And so you're able to dial into a place where you're in, look at the DNA of that place, and then work with builders to say, all right, so here are some styles that are really prevalent here. Here's one floor plan, so you don't have to do brain damage on the floor plan, but you can skin that floor plan 3 different ways. And it allows a smaller number of builders and creators to actually create a community that has vibrancy, that has variety, and most importantly, has connectivity. So I think that those are the 2 things that I would probably really focus in on is it connected into the rest of the fabric and does it have that wide variety and narrow range?
Thank you for your time.
So, as a designer, how do I drop my ego and design what people love?
I love it. I think this is what every single time before I walk into a charrette, I do actively remind myself that I am here as a translator, not as a designer. And that is, I love being a designer. I love being an architect. I love to design. And it's a skill set that I love and I love to teach and show and share. But when I'm working in a community, that is the least important part of me. Like the part of me that's important are my hands, because I know how to translate the vision that people are telling me into a plan, into a form. And sometimes, more importantly than a plan, into perspective. So when you look at my bio, it talks about, solving problems with a sketchbook, et cetera, et cetera. I always have a sketchbook on me, and what's the most important part of that is trying to document what I'm seeing visually. And when you are talking to people, if you have a way, if it's you, if it's an illustrator on your team, if you have some way of showing it to people in 3 dimensions, that usually, and not just 3 dimensions like I put it in a SketchUp model, like cool, I love SketchUp and use it every day. I mean, did you sketch over that SketchUp model to show them what it could feel like to be there? And this is especially important in like standing there in perspective. If I'm standing on this street corner and looking toward the river, what does it feel like to be in this place? That's going to be way more important than your plan, almost all the time. The plan is for your regulators. The perspective is for your people. So I would say, most importantly, just the reminding yourself that what you are bringing in terms of the designer is the fact that you have the knowledge and ability to translate what people are saying they want into a place. And you can talk about how to get to where they want. So if people say something like, I want a cul-de-sac because it's quiet on the cul-de-sac, you can talk about how, okay, but there are lots of benefits to connectivity that might outweigh the benefits of your cul-de-sac feeling quiet. So let's talk about other ways we can create quiet pocket neighborhoods or quiet, like a quiet enclave of the street. So it's not like you're saying, because people are going to say things like, oh, I want to be on a cul-de-sac because it's quiet. By the way, I'm not missing cul-de-sacs, my parents are on a cul-de-sac. But I'm missing them in terms of connectivity. And since we talked about connectivity being one of the most important things to a neighborhood versus a project, something like that, that is, I think, what I think about is when you're talking about how to bring to bear what you're talking about with people, how to translate what they're saying they want into something that can work well in terms of urban design. I think we have like a little bit, it's 38, so.
I really enjoyed what you were describing about using a form or building and structure to create space and how that refers to the space around it. And I think this is sort of piggybacking on your little anecdote about the cul-de-sac. How do you see buildings as a way to create a space that influences the space around them? Like, how do you see buildings as being like a change maker in an environment that maybe isn't a neighborhood and is more of a dead-end assemblage of buildings?
Yeah. So I think some of the most important things with that is the size of space becomes really, really important there. So is there a way to get closer to the street? Because I think one of the most important and overlooked spaces that we experience all the time are our streets. And so if you can pull the buildings closer to the street, so if you're talking about a dead-end assemblage of buildings, if you come out to, if it stubs out to the end, you kind of have buildings kind of haphazard scattered around it, is there a way to pull that space closer together? And so lots of different ways. Either can you pull it along the street? Can you create a small pocket or square or something that you can frame the buildings around? Because what's interesting about when you're creating space with buildings is what the building is becomes kind of less important as long as it has some level of transparency at the ground level. So like where you are as a person, if you're experiencing it, how do you get things close together? And that transparency can exist in, if you're talking residential, it can be, or even some commercial spaces, is there some sort of a porch or patio or something that you can get a little closer with? If you are talking commercial, are there storefronts with awnings? Are there things where you can get the space a little tighter? Because most of the time, some of the most interesting spaces are some of the smallest ones. So when you talk about alleys, or you talk about smaller streets, or you talk about the little medieval corridors and things, it's about how do you tighten up that space? Because most of the time, and we do this all the time as designers, we will make the space too big all the time. Like we will draw some sort of pocket neighborhood or some sort of green or whatever, and it's too big, almost all the time. And we're only kind of learning that more as these spaces get built and actually seeing them in practice. So most of the time when I tell people, when I'm working with people, and what I tell myself all the time when I'm drawing is there a way to tighten that up and to make it a little smaller, to make it closer and more intimate?
One follow-up on that. How do you see, or what techniques would you use to tighten up a space in a rural context? A lot of what we work with here is large open spaces. So how do you accomplish the same things maybe in a larger, more spread out context?
In a rural context, I immediately go to the farm, the characteristics of farm and agricultural buildings and how they work in the greater context. So, for example, one of the places we work quite a bit in is in Swickley Heights, Pennsylvania, where we consult for their Historic Architectural Review Board. And we wrote a pattern book for Swickley Heights that focused on the cultural heritage of the land, because there's no like defined architectural heritage that unites everybody together there. There's 28 original estates that over time get subdivided into farms and small enclaves, and so it's relatively rural in terms of there are minimum 100-foot setbacks, the minimum lot size 5 acres. This is a rural context. And so what becomes really important there is the clustering of buildings as they were done historically for agricultural purposes. So it's like, all right, you can create a little loop where you can drive up and around that there's the feed barn, the horse barn, the main house, and the caretaker's cottage, and that created the space. And so the rest of it, there might be 28 acres around it of just open land, which is fine. I am 100%, if there's one general thing that I would love to see more of, it is the clustering of development to allow for conservation of land to happen around it. It's not about spreading out, it's about how do we pull things together. Because like I said, some of the most successful spaces are going to be your smallest spaces. So I would say in a rural context, to really focus on the precedence of agricultural spaces and how they clustered buildings, because they did that so that they were more functional and more usable, and they created great spaces. Barnyards are great. Like if you're in a lot of like historic barnyards, if you're in historic loops around, there's a great little farm outside of Chicago called Crabtree Farm, which I use it all the time as a precedent in terms of the size of like if I had a couple of small buildings, how do you get around and move around. And so that's what I would really look at is take some measurements by air or on foot of historic agricultural spaces and see their size and how they work, and then work to conserve the rest of the land that you have, because that's a resource we can't get back. In 2 minutes, so I think we can
One more question.
So I want to fill out the framework here. We talked about what largely look like urban spaces. We just had a little foray into rural spaces. I saw an image that you had that really piqued my interest on how you go in and you do some retrofitting in suburban spaces where you've got very deep setbacks from the street. I don't know if you could pull that image up again, but it was wonderful. It used a series of landscaping and pathways and drainage modifications that was very intriguing, and I would love to show that to my community as I'm talking with them about how we can take the residential strip would be the way I would think about it, because it's really off the main drag, it's within the neighborhood itself. Yes, thank you.
This is Carlton Landing in Oklahoma, and so this actually recently won a CNU Charter Award. And so I think that something we need to look at here, as you can see, they really focused on some of the principles of light imprint here, which is another thing that I would encourage you to look up. Light imprint really talks about how can you do development that is leaner and not as focused on heavy infrastructure, curb and gutter, et cetera, et cetera. And so here they did a lot with boardwalks, which I really appreciated. But I would say some of the big things that you can look at in terms of a suburban retrofit, there's an appetite in the spectrum of like how intense that retrofit can go. So some places are like, yes, we are 100% okay with putting an ADU in your front yard and making a motor port to front. Some places are like, are you kidding? So I don't know what the appetite is in the different communities you have, but that's one, like, what we were just saying in terms of pulling forward the space. Is there a way to tighten up the space, either through building porches that encroach onto setbacks, into putting things like motor ports out so you can create a tighter space with maybe an ADU, something where you can put things in the front. Always are there ways to allow for sidewalks, trees. So often when we're working with streets that we don't have a lot of control over, so they're owned by DOTs, things like that, we're increasingly looking more and more at trying to get agreement with getting easements on the outside of the right-of-way, and then creating pedestrian infrastructure there. So we're working on that agreement with South Carolina, for example, where it's just like, all right, so how do you get more space to really create that pedestrian infrastructure that you really want, but you may not be able to do in the right of way because you are hitting into a DOT wall. And, you know, with all respect to the Maine DOT folks who are here today, there are DOTs all over the country who it can get really challenging. So I would say the biggest thing is how do you tighten up those spaces, really seeing the street as a space and not just as a way to get from here to there is very accurate.